This entire story, the life I'm living right now, is true. It all happened to me, starting less than 2 years ago when I was 23, and it began not with a bang, but with a quiet, condescending pronouncement made over a family dinner. The proof of the deeper betrayal, however, came hours later, not as a whisper, but as a silent, glowing testament on the screen of a silver MacBook left open on my desk. It was an iMessage thread, a conversation between my boyfriend and his supposed study partner, and the very first message I saw wasn't about him cheating on me, but about them dissecting my worth. "Carol's right," the message glowed in a cruel blue bubble that seemed to burn into my retinas. "She really doesn't have what it takes. Cute, but no ambition." If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. The stale, oppressive air of my Aunt Carol's dining room was a character in itself. It was a suffocating blend of old lady potpourri, furniture polish, and the faint, greasy scent of the overcooked roast chicken sitting centerpiece on her mahogany table. It was the smell of judgment, a scent I had associated with her since childhood. Every mandatory family gathering was held here, in her meticulously kept row home, in a leafy, desirable corner of Philadelphia's Queen Village. And every gathering felt less like a celebration of family and more like a public tribunal where my life choices were cross-examined and found wanting. That particular Sunday in May was, even by her standards, a masterclass in psychological warfare. I had graduated from Temple University 6 months earlier with a degree in urban studies and a minor in geography. I was passionate about cities, about how they worked, about making them better, more equitable places. This passion had landed me an entry-level job as a research assistant at a small nonprofit that advocated for affordable housing. It wasn't glamorous. The pay was barely enough to cover my half of the rent on a cramped apartment near the Italian market and my student loan payments. But it was meaningful work. It was my first step on a career path I had chosen for myself. To my Aunt Carol, it was a catastrophic failure. "Urban studies?" she'd boomed from the head of the table, her voice carrying across the polite clinking of silverware. She had a way of turning a genuine question into an accusation. "Is that what they're calling it these days, when you can't get into the architecture program at Penn? Don't you worry, Maya." She reached across the table to pat my hand, her skin papery and dry, her diamond rings cold against my knuckles. "Not everyone is meant to build things. Some people are just, well, they're the tenants." She smiled, a tight, bloodless motion of her lips that didn't reach her cold, assessing eyes. She took a delicate sip of her Chardonnay, the victor of an exchange I hadn't even known we were having. My face flushed a hot, blotchy red. I could feel the eyes of my cousins, my uncle, my own mother, all turning to me. I glanced across the table at my boyfriend, Evan, hoping for a lifeline. A small smile, a roll of the eyes, a quiet word of defense. Anything. Evan was a second-year MBA student at Penn's Wharton School, the polished, confident heir to a minor real estate empire. His father, a man whose handshake felt like a business transaction, owned a portfolio of sleek, soulless luxury condo buildings in Center City and along the main line. To Evan and his family, the world was a simple binary. You either owned property or you were the property of those who did. He met my desperate gaze and offered only a non-committal shrug, a slight tilt of his head that I had for 2 years tragically misinterpreted as laid-back neutrality. I realize now it was tacit agreement. Aunt Carol, sensing she had a captive audience, pressed her advantage. "I just worry about you, sweetie. This city is getting so expensive. My little place right here?" She gestured vaguely toward her own walls. "Rent-controlled, an absolute gem. I've been here for 15 years, can you believe it? Old Mr. Henderson hasn't raised my rent more than $20 in the last decade. A saint, that man. I'll probably die in this apartment." She let out a dry little laugh. You could never find a deal like that now, not with your situation. You'll be paying someone else's mortgage for the rest of your life." The pity in her voice was a physical thing, a thick, cloying syrup. "You just have to accept it, Maya. You're not a landlord, you're a renter. And that's okay. It's important to know your place in the world, you know?" Every word was a precisely calibrated dart, aimed at the heart of my insecurities. I felt small, insignificant, like a child being lectured. I looked to Evan again. He was meticulously cutting a piece of chicken, his focus entirely on his plate. He was actively refusing to engage, to defend me, to be my partner. He was leaving me to drown. In that moment, watching him chew his food with detached precision, a tiny hairline crack formed in the foundation of my love for him. Later that night, the oppressive atmosphere of Carol's house seemed to have followed me home, clinging to my clothes and hair. Evan had come back to my apartment, a gesture that was supposed to seem supportive. He'd kissed my forehead, murmured something about Carol being a bitter old woman, and then promptly sprawled out on my lumpy couch, claiming he was exhausted from a week of studying. He'd set his silver MacBook on my small desk to charge before passing out. The silence in our little apartment, usually a comfort, now felt accusatory. My roommate Lena, an art student who communicated primarily through weary sighs and paint splatters on her clothes, was out for the night. It was just me in the echoing silence, filled with my aunt's pronouncements. "You're a renter. Know your place." I tried to focus on a grant proposal for work, but the words swam on the screen. I was 23 and felt like my life had already been written for me, my potential capped and sealed by the very people who were supposed to encourage me. I glanced over at Evan's laptop. Its screen was dark, but it pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light. I knew his password. He'd given it to me months ago, a casual, trusting gesture so I could use his expensive Adobe software for a class project. A toxic, unfamiliar impulse rose in my throat. It was a cocktail of the evening's humiliation, the festering insecurity, and the hairline crack of doubt that Evan's inaction had created. I told myself I was just going to close his open applications to save the battery. A lie, but a necessary one to get me from my chair to the desk. I typed in the password. The screen flared to life, and there it was, the iMessage application left open and glowing. The most recent conversation was pinned to the top with a name that made my stomach clench. Kinsley Thorne. I knew Kinsley. She was in Evan's mergers and acquisitions cohort at Wharton. A girl with a trust fund, a surgically perfect nose, and an Instagram feed filled with photos from her family's yacht in Nantucket and ski trips in Aspen. Evan had called her annoyingly competitive and a total shark. He'd complained about her constantly. It had been, I now saw with blinding, nauseating clarity, a masterful deception. My eyes landed on the last message sent from Evan's computer, the one I'd glimpsed from across the room. "Carol's right. She really doesn't have what it takes. Cute, but no ambition." My blood ran cold. He hadn't just failed to defend me. He had gone home and confirmed my aunt's verdict with his new girlfriend. I started scrolling up, my hand trembling so badly I could barely control the trackpad. It was a graveyard of my dignity. Weeks, months of messages. Every complaint I'd ever shared with him in confidence about my job, my student loan debt, my anxieties about the future, he had relayed to her, repackaged as evidence of my mediocrity. They had inside jokes about my nonprofit salary. They made fun of my secondhand clothes. He had taken every vulnerability I had ever shown him and presented it to another woman as a reason why I wasn't good enough. And then came the rest of it, the explicit proof of the affair. A weekend trip to New York City 2 months ago, a weekend he'd told me he was on a mandatory Wharton retreat in the Poconos. There were photos of them at a rooftop bar in the East Village, his arms slung possessively around her waist, her face tilted up to his in a pose of intimate adoration that made me want to vomit. There were screenshots of hotel confirmations at the Ludlow, a place I'd once mentioned I'd love to stay at for my birthday. There were Venmo transactions for hundreds of dollars, disguised with innocent emojis of pizza and books, but the dates and amounts lined up perfectly with restaurant receipts I saw in other screenshots. Dinners at Carbone, cocktails at Bemelman's bar, all paid for with the joint access credit card he had insisted we get for emergencies and shared expenses. Apparently, my terminal lack of ambition constituted an emergency that required a $500 plate of spicy rigatoni in another state with another woman. The betrayal was so complete, so multifaceted, it was almost elegant in its cruelty. It wasn't just that he was sleeping with someone else. It was that he had systematically dismantled my character to justify it. He had taken my aunt's casual, bitter judgment and forged it into the philosophical cornerstone of his infidelity. I wasn't just being cheated on, I was being erased. I sank into my desk chair, the blue light of the screen illuminating the silent tears carving hot tracks through my makeup. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. But beneath the crushing weight of heartbreak, a different feeling began to smolder. It was a cold, clear, incandescent rage. The kind of anger that burns away confusion and leaves behind a terrible, diamond-hard clarity. You're a renter. Know your place. The words had been designed to be a cage, a life sentence of mediocrity. But as I sat there in the pre-dawn darkness of my cheap apartment, staring at the digital blueprint of my own destruction, the words began to transform. They stopped being an insult and started to sound like a dare. They stopped being a verdict and started to sound like a starting line. My aunt and my boyfriend had collaborated on a story about me, a story where I was the weak, unambitious, supporting character in their much more important lives. I decided, in that moment, that I was going to burn their story to the ground. And from the ashes, I would build my own damn empire. The breakup was a quiet, surgical procedure. I didn't wait for him to wake up on his own. I walked over to the couch and nudged his shoulder, my touch devoid of any warmth. "Evan, wake up!" He groaned, blinking his eyes open, a sleepy, charming smile already forming on his lips. "Hey, you! What time is it?" His smile faltered when he saw my face. My expression was a blank wall. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a dramatic scene. I simply picked up his laptop from the desk and turned it so the screen faced him. I watched as his eyes scanned the open iMessage thread. I watched his face cycle through a Rolodex of predictable emotions, groggy confusion, then a flicker of recognition, then dawning, sickening horror. The color drained from his handsome face. He shot up from the couch, suddenly wide awake. "Maya, baby, wait. It's not what it looks like. We were just studying." The lie was so pathetic, so insulting in its lack of effort, it was almost funny. I used the trackpad to scroll to a photo of them tangled in the sheets of their hotel bed, a half-empty bottle of champagne on the nightstand. "Studying the physiological effects of sleep deprivation on Wharton MBA candidates?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. The gaslighting began then, a desperate, torrential downpour of excuses, deflections, and accusations. I was the one who was wrong for violating his privacy. I was paranoid. I was insecure. He was under an immense amount of pressure from his family and his program. Kinsley was just a friend, a release valve for his stress. He even had the audacity to use my aunt's words against me one last time. "You've been so on edge since what Carol said at dinner. You're twisting things, Maya. You're looking for a reason to be angry." That was it. That was the moment. The last vestige of the boy I had loved evaporated, leaving behind this sniveling, cowardly stranger. He wasn't just a cheater. He was a master manipulator, willing to use my own emotional wounds as a shield for his deceit. "Get your things, Evan," I said, my voice flat. "I want you out of my apartment." He gaped at me, shocked that his usual tactics weren't working. You're making a huge mistake. You're throwing away the best thing that ever happened to you. You'll be miserable in this tiny apartment, working your sad little job forever, and you'll regret this." The door clicked shut behind him, and the silence that filled the apartment was different this time. It wasn't lonely. It was clean. It was the sound of a slate being wiped, of a foundation being cleared for new construction. The next morning, driven by some masochistic impulse, I called my Aunt Carol. I told her in a clipped, emotionless tone that Evan and I had broken up. I think a small part of me, the part that still clung to the childish belief in family, hoped for a flicker of sympathy. A simple, "I'm sorry to hear that, dear." Instead, I was rewarded with a barely concealed note of triumph. "Oh, honey," she cooed, her voice dripping with fake empathy. "I knew he was too much for you. A boy like that, with his family, his ambition. He needs a girl who can keep up. Don't you worry. You'll find someone more on your level eventually. Maybe a nice boy from that charity you work at." She wasn't comforting me. She was validating her own prophecy. She was taking a victory lap on the rubble of my relationship. That was the last voluntary conversation I ever had with her. I didn't block her number. That would have been an emotional response. Instead, I simply stopped answering her calls. I stopped replying to her texts. I made her irrelevant. Her power, I realized, was an illusion I had helped create by caring about her opinion. I decided to stop caring, but I didn't forget her words. I collected them, every last condescending syllable, and I used them to build a furnace inside myself. Her voice became the engine of my new life. Her judgment became my fuel. My mission began with a quiet, obsessive fervor. I approached it like one of the urban planning projects I researched at work, with phases, meticulous data collection, and clearly defined goals. Phase 1 was capital accumulation. My salary from the nonprofit was just enough to survive. It was not enough to build. I needed a second source of income, something with high earning potential and flexible hours. The answer was Philadelphia's high-end restaurant scene. I polished my resume, put on my one good dress, and walked into one of the most expensive steakhouses in Rittenhouse Square, a place where Evan had once taken me for an anniversary dinner that had cost more than my monthly share of the rent. I used the memory to my advantage, describing the service and menu with a familiarity that impressed the manager. I was hired as a weekend waitress. The irony was exquisite. I spent my Friday and Saturday nights from 5 p.m. to 2 a.m. on my feet, carrying trays laden with $200 porterhouse steaks and decanting $500 bottles of Cabernet for people who lived in the world I was supposedly unfit for. The work was brutal. My feet throbbed, my back ached, and I dealt with a parade of entitled finance bros and their surgically enhanced dates who treated me like furniture. But the tips were a revelation. Every $20 bill, every $50, every crumpled $100 I smoothed out at the end of a grueling 9-hour shift felt like a small act of rebellion. It was concrete, tangible progress. My life shrank to a simple, exhausting loop. My desk job from 9 to 5, a quick dinner of instant ramen, and then the restaurant until the early hours of the morning. My social life ceased to exist. I stopped buying coffee, I learned to cut my own hair from a YouTube tutorial, and I sold half my clothes at a consignment shop. My roommate Lena was convinced I was having a breakdown. "This isn't healthy, Maya," she'd say, watching me from her perch on our sagging couch as I sat at the kitchen table at 3 a.m., meticulously entering my tips into an Excel spreadsheet. "You look like a ghost. What is all this for?" I would just smile, a thin, tired smile. "I have a plan, Lena. For the first time in my life, I have a real plan." Phase 2 was education. My knowledge of real estate was limited to paying my rent on time. I had to become an expert, and I had to do it for free. The internet became my university. While my peers were binge-watching Netflix, I was binge-watching seminars on property valuation, underwriting, and creative financing strategies. I listened to real estate podcasts while I commuted on the subway. I downloaded the syllabi for real estate finance courses at Wharton and found the textbooks as free PDFs online. I was learning the language of my enemy. I spent every lunch break at work studying for the Pennsylvania real estate license exam, not because I wanted to be an agent, but because I wanted the knowledge and the access to the MLS database. On Sundays, my one day off, I didn't rest. I went to open houses. I'd put on my professional-looking consignment shop dress and walk through properties I couldn't possibly afford, from sprawling Victorian twins in West Philly to newly constructed townhouses in Fishtown. I wasn't there to buy. I was there to learn. I listened to the realtors pitch their listings. I listened to the concerns of other buyers. I asked pointed questions about the HVAC systems, the age of the roof, the property tax history. I started to develop a keen eye for value, for potential, for the hidden problems and opportunities that lay beneath a fresh coat of gray paint. And I became laser-focused on one specific type of property: small multifamily homes, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes. The strategy, which I learned was called house hacking, was a beautiful, elegant solution to my problem. It was a way to leverage the bank's money to build my own wealth. You live in one unit, and the rent from the other units covers your mortgage and expenses. It was the key. It was the way a person like me, with no family money and no connections, could shatter the landlord-renter binary. It was my path to freedom. The 18 months that followed were a blur of work and study. I operated like a machine, fueled by caffeine, rage, and the steadily growing number at the bottom of my spreadsheet. I hit my first milestone, $10,000, after 6 months. I celebrated by treating myself to a single scoop of ice cream from the shop down the street. It tasted like victory. I saw Evan once during that time. He showed up at my nonprofit's office, unannounced, holding a bouquet of lilies, my former favorite flower. He looked diminished. The easy, effortless confidence he always wore like a well-tailored suit was gone, replaced by a desperate, haunted look in his eyes. "I miss you, Maya," he said, his voice low and raspy. "Kinsley and I, it was a mistake. I was an idiot. My life is a mess without you. Let me make it up to you." He tried to spin a story about the pressure from his father, about the stress of Wharton, about how he'd said things he didn't mean because he felt insecure. I looked at him, at the expensive watch on his wrist that my waitressing tips from a single good weekend could now pay for, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pain, not even a ghost of the love I once felt. He was an artifact from a different era of my life, a museum piece I no longer had any interest in visiting. "I'm sorry, Evan, but I'm busy," I said, my voice polite but firm. "I have work to do." I closed the office door on his shocked face and went back to my desk, my heart rate perfectly steady. The work I was doing had nothing to do with him anymore. It had everything to do with me. At the 1-year mark of my plan, I met Sharon. She was a veteran realtor in her late 50s, with a shock of spiky gray hair, a booming laugh, and a reputation for being one of the toughest negotiators in South Philly. I met her at an open house for a dilapidated duplex in the Newbold neighborhood. I was doing my usual reconnaissance, peppering the overwhelmed listing agent with questions about the zoning variances and the state of the knob and tube wiring. Sharon was there with another client, but she overheard my interrogation. After her clients left, she cornered me in the crumbling kitchen. "You're not here to buy this dump, are you, kid?" she asked, her sharp eyes appraising me. "You've been here for 45 minutes, and you haven't said a word about the granite countertops, but you spent 10 minutes in the basement staring at the sewer line." Caught, I confessed everything. My plan, my savings goal, my obsession with multifamily properties. I expected her to laugh me out of the building. Instead, she listened intently, a slow smile spreading across her face. "I like you," she said when I finished. "You've got fire in your belly. Most people your age just whine about the market. You're actually trying to understand it." She handed me her card. "Call me when you hit your down payment number. I like working with people who have something to prove. We're going to find you a building." Sharon became my mentor, my drill sergeant, and my biggest cheerleader. She sent me listings to analyze for practice. She taught me how to spot a bad flip, how to estimate repair costs, and how to talk to contractors. She connected me with a mortgage broker who specialized in FHA loans for first-time homebuyers. For the first time, I had an ally, someone who saw my ambition not as a flaw or a threat, but as a strength. 1 year, 7 months, and 3 weeks after the breakup, I hit my number. Through a relentless combination of my 2 jobs, I had saved $40,957. The number glowed on my spreadsheet, a beautiful, hard-won constellation of thousands of small sacrifices. My mortgage broker, a patient man named David, had pre-approved me for a loan up to $550,000. My hunt for a property began in earnest. Every night after work, I would mainline coffee and scour the MLS. Every Sunday, Sharon and I would pile into her sensible Subaru and drive through the city, touring properties. We saw so many duds. A duplex in Point Breeze where one of the tenants was clearly running an illegal chop shop in the garage. A triplex in Kensington with a hole in the roof so big you could see the sky. It was a discouraging process. The Philadelphia market was on fire, and any decent multifamily property was being snapped up in days by all-cash investors in fierce bidding wars. A familiar despair began to creep in at the edges of my resolve. Maybe Carol was right. Maybe I was destined to be a renter forever. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I was at my desk at the nonprofit, feeling particularly defeated. On a whim, I changed my search filter on Zillow to Queen Village, my aunt's neighborhood. It was a masochistic exercise. The properties there were historic and beautiful, and almost all of them were well over $1 million. But then I saw it, a new listing, posted only an hour ago. For sale by owner, charming brick triplex. The price was listed at $580,000. It was a stretch, but maybe, just maybe, not impossible. The photos were grainy and poorly lit, but there was something familiar about the facade. I clicked on the address, and my breath caught in my throat. I didn't need to see the street view. I knew that building. I knew the slightly crooked black shutters on the second-floor windows. I knew the perpetually overflowing flower box on the first-floor sill. It was my Aunt Carol's building. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, wild drumbeat. It felt like the universe was delivering the perfect punchline. This wasn't just a property anymore. This was a destiny. The listing described the owner, an elderly man named Mr. Henderson, as motivated. He was retiring to Florida to live with his daughter and wanted a quick, uncomplicated sale. He had priced it just slightly below market value to attract a direct buyer and avoid realtor commissions. My hands were shaking as I called Sharon. "I found it," I said, my voice a choked whisper. "I found the one." We went to see it the next day. Mr. Henderson, a kind, stooped man with watery blue eyes and a gentle smile, walked us through the property himself. The first floor was a small one-bedroom, occupied by a quiet grad student. The third floor was a similar unit, but it was vacant and in need of some cosmetic updates, and the second floor was my Aunt Carol's apartment. We didn't go inside. "Don't want to disturb Carol," Mr. Henderson said with an affectionate sigh. "She's been here forever, a real fixture, rent-controlled, of course, pays way below market rate. That's the one downside of the property, I suppose. But she's quiet as a mouse and always pays her rent on time." I just nodded, my face a carefully composed mask of polite interest, my mind a whirlwind of calculations and vengeful fantasies. Sharon and I went to a nearby coffee shop to run the numbers. The mortgage, taxes, and insurance would be roughly $3,200 a month. The first-floor unit rented for $8,400. The vacant third-floor unit, after a coat of paint and some new appliances, could easily fetch $1,500. And Aunt Carol? She was paying a criminally low $850 a month for a prime apartment in Queen Village. The total monthly rent was $3,050. Even with Carol's subsidized existence, the building would cash flow from day one. And if I lived in the vacant third-floor unit myself for the first year, as FHA loans require, my personal housing cost would be next to nothing. The asking price was still an issue. $580,000 was $30,000 over. My pre-approval. "He's a motivated seller, but he's not a fool," Sharon said, tapping her pen on her notepad. "We can't lowball him, offer $565,000, but you're going to write him a letter, a personal letter. Tell him your story, not the revenge part," she added with a mischievous wink, "but the part about being a young woman from this city, working for a non-profit, trying to build a future for herself here. These old-school Philly guys, they're sentimental. It's not always about the highest number for them. It's about legacy." I went home and spent the entire night crafting that letter. I wrote about my passion for Philadelphia, about my work in affordable housing. I told him that I wasn't a faceless investor looking to flip the property, but someone who would cherish the building and be a responsible landlord and a good neighbor. I poured every ounce of my sincerity, my struggle, and my ambition onto that single page. We submitted the offer and the letter the next morning. The following 2 days were the longest of my life. I barely ate. I didn't sleep. I just stared at my phone, willing it to ring. Finally, on Thursday afternoon, Sharon called. My stomach dropped. "He got another offer," she said, and I felt the air leave my lungs. It was over. An all-cash offer for his full asking price, from a developer. This was it, the end of the dream. "But," she continued, and I could hear the massive grin in her voice, "he took ours. He said he sold to developers once before, and they tore the whole building down. He said he read your letter, and you reminded him of his daughter when she was starting out. Congratulations, kid. You're buying a building." I collapsed onto my couch and burst into tears, not of sadness, but of a relief so profound and overwhelming it felt like my bones were dissolving. It was happening. It was real. The 2-month closing period was a bureaucratic nightmare. The bank scrutinized every penny I had ever earned. My dual income stream, once my salvation, was now a red flag for the underwriters. They called it unstable. There were days I was sure the whole deal would collapse under the weight of the paperwork. But Sharon was my champion, fighting with the loan officer on my behalf, guiding me through every bewildering step. And then, on a crisp, sunny Friday in October, I found myself in a sterile, airless conference room in a center city skyscraper. I signed a stack of documents so thick it looked like a phone book for a small city. When it was all over, a tired-looking lawyer pushed a small set of keys across the polished table toward me. They felt impossibly heavy in my palm, solid and real and momentous. One key was for the front door of the building, one was for the third-floor apartment, my apartment, and one was a small brass master key, the key that opened every door in the building, including my Aunt Carol's. I was 24 years old, and I was a landlord. I spent the weekend moving my few belongings into the third-floor unit. It was small, but it was mine. From the living room window, I could see the charming, tree-lined streets of Queen Village. My home. After 2 years of relentless, tunnel vision focus, of a life stripped down to its barest essentials, I could finally breathe. But there was one last piece of business to attend to. Phase 3 of my plan, the execution of the victory. I waited until Monday morning. I wanted this to be official, professional. I dressed carefully in a simple black dress and low heels. I wanted to look not like a vengeful niece, but like a property owner. I had prepared a small, neat packet of documents. The first was a professionally written letter introducing myself as the new owner of the property. The second was a copy of her existing lease agreement, which I had received from Mr. Henderson, with the clause that stated the lease would transfer to the new owner under the exact same terms until its date of expiration highlighted in yellow. Her lease, I had noted with a thrill of grim satisfaction, was set to expire in 60 days. The final document was a new lease agreement, ready for her to sign when the time came. The new proposed rent for her two-bedroom apartment was $1,075 a month, the current, carefully researched market rate. It was more than double what she was paying, but it was fair, it was legal, and for her, it would be catastrophic. At exactly 10 a.m., I walked down the single flight of stairs and knocked firmly on the door of apartment number 2. I could hear a morning talk show blaring from the television inside. After a long moment, the door creaked open. Aunt Carol stood there, wrapped in a faded pink chenille bathrobe, a half-empty mug of coffee in her hand. Her hair was a mess, and there was a sleep crease on her cheek. She blinked at me, her face a mask of pure confusion. "Maya, what on earth are you doing here? Don't tell me you're canvassing for that charity of yours in this neighborhood now." Her default setting was, as always, condescension. It was almost comforting in its predictability. "Hello, Carol," I said, my voice perfectly level, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I need to speak with you for a moment. It's a landlord-tenant matter." A flicker of alarm crossed her face, which she quickly concealed with a sneer. "Oh, please. Don't tell me you're looking for an apartment. You can't afford this neighborhood, honey. You should try looking somewhere out in the Northeast. It's more your speed." I held up the crisp manila envelope in my hand. "I'm not here to rent, Aunt Carol. I'm here because I purchased the building." I let the words hang in the silent hallway between us. I watched her mind work, watched her try to process the impossible statement. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. The color began to drain from her face, leaving her skin a pasty, mottled gray. What?" she finally stammered. "That's not funny, Maya. That's a cruel, stupid joke." "It's not a joke," I said, my voice still quiet, still calm. I extended the envelope to her. "Mr. Henderson finalized the sale with me last week. The closing was on Friday. I'm the new owner. My name is the one you'll be writing on your rent checks from now on." Her hand trembled as she took the envelope. She tore it open with clumsy, shaking fingers. She pulled out the introductory letter, her eyes scanning the official letterhead I had designed myself. M. Davis Properties. Her gaze darted from the paper to my face and back again, her brain short-circuiting as it tried to reconcile the niece she had dismissed her entire life with the woman standing before her, holding all the power. All the smugness, all the pity, all the casual soul-crushing cruelty I had absorbed from her for 2 decades, it all just evaporated in an instant. It melted away, leaving behind a terrified, suddenly old woman in a ratty bathrobe. You can't have," she whispered, the words barely audible. "How? You don't have any money. You work for charity. You're a renter." The words, once a weapon she had wielded with such surgical precision, now came out as a pathetic, defeated plea. It was the last gasp of her carefully constructed reality. "I got a second job, Aunt Carol," I said, my voice still gentle, but with an edge of steel beneath it. "I saved my money. I studied. It turns out I am meant to build things after all. I'm starting with my own future." I gestured to the papers in her hand. "As you'll see, your current lease is valid for another 60 days at your current rate. After that, we'll need to sign a new lease at the market rate. I've included a copy of that new lease for your review. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'll be living upstairs in Unit 3 if you need anything." I paused, letting the full weight of the situation settle upon her. "Welcome to the building." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply met her terrified, disbelieving gaze with my own clear, steady one. The power dynamic between us hadn't just shifted, it had been permanently and irrevocably obliterated. She was no longer the matriarch, the judge, the arbiter of my self-worth. She was just my tenant. I gave her one last final nod, then turned and walked calmly back up the stairs to my own apartment, leaving her standing in her doorway, clutching the documents that represented the complete and total demolition of her world as she knew it. The sound of my key turning in my own lock was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It's been 6 months now. Aunt Carol is still here, in apartment 2. She signed the new lease, her signature a spidery, shaky scrawl. She pays her new market rate rent on the 1st of every month, leaving a check in a plain white envelope in my mailbox without a word. We don't speak. If we pass on the stairs, she flattens herself against the wall and stares at her feet until I've passed. The formidable cutting woman I grew up fearing is gone, replaced by this quiet, diminished ghost who now has to ask my permission to hang a new picture on her wall. I don't feel guilt, but I don't feel triumph either. Just a quiet, profound sense of order restored. As for Evan, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he and Kinsley broke up shortly after he failed to graduate on time. His father, furious at the embarrassment, apparently cut him off financially. The last I heard, he was working an entry-level sales job for a company that sells office supplies. I saw him once, across the street from a coffee shop in my neighborhood. He looked tired and rumpled. Our eyes met for a brief second across the traffic. I saw a flash of anger in his eyes, quickly replaced by a wave of shame, and then something else, fear. He turned and hurried away, swallowed by the crowd. I felt nothing. He's just a footnote in a chapter of my life I've already finished reading. My life now is full. It's full of the satisfying exhaustion that comes from hard work, the easy camaraderie I have with my other tenants, and the deep, abiding peace of knowing I am the sole architect of my own existence. Sometimes, late at night, I sit by my living room window, looking out at the glittering lights of the city I love, the city I am now, in my own small way, a part of building. And I hear my aunt's voice, a faint, disarmed echo from a distant past. "You're just not a landlord, Maya. You're a renter." And I smile to myself in the darkness, because she was right about one thing. I was a renter. But people can change. And some people, when you push them hard enough, when you tell them what they can't be, don't just build a new life, they buy the whole damn building. The end.